Well, thank you for joining me today. You're Head of Climate Action at the Institution of Structural Engineers. What does your role entail?
So about 2 years ago or so, the institution made a commitment that we treat sustainability on a par with life safety, which has always been the sort of key tenet of everything we've existed for. So it's quite a big sort of change in policy to do this. My job is to take that and make sure that we are applying sustainability throughout everything we do. So whether that's standards for our members, for example, we've updated the chartership requirements for structural engineers. As of next year, you have to be able to speak about carbon as part of your work. Whether it's to do with standards guidance in order to meet those standards, we've generated 80 or so guidance notes over the last few years, and then some of the wider, more collaborative industry pieces, making sure that we're saying the same things as REBA and CIBSE and everybody else as well. So it's quite broad, but it's everything that we do that touches on sustainability kind of starts on my shoulders.
So we're here at Future Build today. You've just finished a part of a panel debate, and it was entitled, "In a World Where Embodied Carbon is Regulated, What Has Changed?" So what does the future where embodied carbon is being regulated look like? And how does that affect the way we design and construct buildings?
So, I mean, the debate was good because actually I think what it did was it showed us that in a world when embodied carbon is regulated, I mean, it's quite exciting, really. It's, we're talking about a world that's maybe not that far away. We're talking it coming in years. This is not decades, it's years. And it's a world in which you have carbon as maybe the fourth key driver. You currently have cost, time and quality, and carbon forms a sort of fourth side to this. Obviously, a lot of things change. So when you're first sitting down to design a project, you're no longer just saying, well, how do we create a school within this budget, within this highway, etc. It's also within this carbon footprint. And that might seem like constraints, but of course constraints drive creativity. And so you start looking at the massing of the school, you try and work out where's best on the site to place it in terms of tackling that carbon early on. Business models evolving, so that people are working out, well, how do we go beyond having low carbon as a USP if everyone's trying to do it? How can we be lower carbon than everybody else? And of course the regulatory side as well, which is what the tool is all about, that in itself will drive some change because that'll set a baseline. But what's really going to happen is that everyone's going to try and better the baseline in the same way we do what we see at the moment with Part L. Local authorities, developers, clients, they all want to go such and such percent better. And at the moment you can't really do that with embodied because you don't have that baseline or you don't have a standardised way of assessing it. So, a really exciting future, but one where this just becomes a really normal part of our sort of day-to-day lives in terms of design and construction.
You're author of a proposal for a new building regulation amendment, the introduction of approved document Z. This outlines requirements for the assessment of whole life carbon emissions and limiting embodied carbon emissions. What stage is this proposal currently at?
So we, as the authors of this document, I should stress that this is a sort of industry proposed document. This is not something that government have asked us to do anything. We wrote this about 6 or 8 months ago with a view of getting this conversation really moving at pace in the industry. We wrote it to demonstrate that it's very feasible and actually relatively simple, I believe, to introduce embodied carbon regulation. It asks for those two things. It asks for you to report whole life carbon and then limit embodied carbon. And since launching, we've had about 120 or so firms write us statements of support for the regulation of embodied carbon. It's a huge amount of industry backing. In terms of where it's at, in terms of, from a governmental point of view, I guess, we know that the civil service and the government are aware that it exists. They're aware that the industry is asking for it. We know that they're trying to work out where this goes next. As anyone who joined us in the session earlier will have heard, the chair of that debate was also the chair of the Environmental Audit Select Committee and an MP, and he stood up at the end and said the government knows that this needs to happen. It's a case of when rather than if. So it's all progress in the right direction. I think the thing we're trying to do now is just keep things rolling and quicker rather than slower, I'd say.
If we look at the now, UK, we've got a target to be net zero by 2050. It's a massively ambitious target. Do you think it's achievable?
I don't think it's ambitious enough.
Okay.
I think we are fortunate enough to have been born into a country that's one of the richest countries in the world. We've emitted a lot of carbon historically. If any countries in the world have the ability to decarbonise quicker than 2050, we are one of them. And what the IPCC and the UN and everybody else is actually saying is that on average, across the whole of the world, you need to achieve net zero by 2050. there or thereabouts. And on average, across the whole of the world, you need to halve emissions by 2030. If the UK can't go faster than that, then I don't know who can. So actually, I think that, yes, it is achievable, because we've seen people build buildings for half the carbon of the standard model of that building in the UK. So we know it's doable. It's about willpower, and it's about enabling those choices to be made on individual projects.
I mean, I'm quite a fan of, if you have the ability, you've also got the responsibility, and it does feel that the UK has the ability to do this, so we have a responsibility to be forward-thinking.
Absolutely, and of course, there's loads of challenges, right? We produce materials in a certain way in this country. We import certain materials. Timber, we import more than we produce at home. Steel, it's about 50-50, but the way we make it here is different to the way it's made in Europe. There's all of these things that will need to evolve in order for construction to be able to respond and play its part to the UK's legally binding decarbonisation targets. But it has to happen. Otherwise, there's no way we're going to meet those targets. And like I said, they are legally binding. These have been passed into law that we're going to, halve emissions and reach net zero.
It was COP26 in Glasgow, end of last year. It really felt that sustainability came to a sort of much more sort of mass market. We definitely sort of felt sort of consumers getting sort of much more behind sort of understanding sustainability and what it meant for them. The construction industry, biggest industry in the UK, we have a responsibility. Do you think that the industry needs to do more? Yes, we need sort of the power to come from consumers, but the construction industry surely has the ability to make seismic impacts. Are we doing enough of that?
Yeah, so you're right. Seismic impacts is correct, right? So 40 or 50 million tonnes of carbon emissions per year in the UK are due to embodied carbon. So that's the use of concrete and steel and glass and aluminium and things like that. And that's more than aviation and shipping combined. So it's a really big piece of the pie. And you're right, we do have a huge responsibility to tackle that. There's movement happening across the industry, of course there is. Materials manufacturers are looking at how they can decarbonise materials. Certain designers are trying to work out how they can use less of those materials. How do we save more existing buildings and reuse those, as opposed to just building new every single time? There's a lot of progress happening, but I think realistically we know that it has to be so much more than what we're currently seeing. The material side of things, for example, it's great that much of the industry is trying to reuse and trying to build less and things like that, but at the end of the day we're still building stuff. We're still using new materials. So until those new materials are lower carbon than they currently are, we're going to go nowhere. So there's, there needs to just be much more of a push behind this. And institutions such as my own, we're there to try and support that movement. And to do what we can to make sure that when new innovations come out, people are aware of them, they know how to use it, they know how to design for it, clients know how to ask for it, all that kind of stuff.
Still on the subject of COP26, it was 2 weeks of promises, politics and protests, ending with the signing of the Glasgow Climate Pact by sort of close to 200 countries. We're now, 5 months down the road. Has much changed? Was it a lot of talk and a lot of promises and promises of action? Have we still got momentum?
I think a lot of people recognise that, that was a lot of talking. Now is the time for action. You hear that a lot in the industry. You're probably aware that BEIS, part of the government, announced that we were going to sign up to the International Decarbonisation Initiative. So there's now a concerted effort from part of the government to set in place green procurement for materials by 2025, in effect. There's real action on that. I was at a meeting about that just last Friday, online with partners from all over the world. So there's real action happening across the spectrum. I think that COP26 was really positive. We came away from it with a lot of work to do, and a lot of people would argue that what was agreed didn't go far enough, but it's all a step in the right direction. It's the only way that change will happen.
One last question. We're here at Future Build, so looking to the future and looking at action. If there was one action that people took away from being here, what would you like that to be?
I would say that it would be to understand the embodied carbon impacts of whatever it is you're designing, working with, procuring, writing a brief for, and then demand that they are lowered. Demand that that embodied carbon is reduced beyond whatever the current baseline is.
Will, thank you very much.
No, thank you.
We hope you found this video from Fabric useful. For more, don't forget to subscribe, browse our playlists, and please like or share this video. Thanks for watching.